Okay, we are now, just again for our attendees and our panelists, we're recording the session. Dr. Rice, is it being streamed to Facebook? Were you able to do that or no?
I will check. I mean, up at the top right-hand corner, it says it is live, but on
Okay,
my screen, it's showing error message, so not
okay.
positive if
All
it.
right. Well, just to err on the side of caution, so that our attendees and our panelists know that it could be live on Facebook, but it is being recorded. Um, so
Yes,
you
so
know
I'm going
what?
to get us started.
I was just going to
That's
say,
going to say I'm going to get us started, everybody. Welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome you here today. To our very first policy webinar for the spring 2025 semester. My name is Dr. Karen Rice. I'm professor and department chair in the School of Social Work, as well as the coordinator for our Learning Institute, now in its 11th year. So
wow.
yeah, we've been doing the policy webinars. Honestly, I can't recall when we started a few years back. And we now collaborate with the Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership, and Dr. Laura Granruth, who is the moderator of our policy webinar, is the coordinator of that center. This semester's focus for our policy webinars is on the advocacy of policy, or policy as advocacy. And we have three general policy areas that we're focusing on this semester, starting with immigration, and then we'll have one with education and one on healthcare later this semester. And we'll tell you more about that at the end of this webinar, but some logistics. I know Dr. Graham shared some of those, but just as a reminder, obviously our attendees, we cannot see or hear you. So we are asking you to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to pose any questions to our panelists. The moderator will be monitoring that and select questions to pose to our panelists. Anyone has the ability to put in chat. Our panelists, you might find they will put resources and suggestions that they might share throughout this 1 hour webinar in our chat. We will compile all of that and share it with you later, so you don't have to necessarily monitor that for throughout the hour. It is being recorded. As Dr. Granner stated, we are recording this and we can share the recording with you. It may also be live streamed on our Facebook page. But right now, it's my pleasure to turn it over to my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Laura Granruth, again, who is associate professor in the School of Social Work. She is our policy guru, and she's also the coordinator of our Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership. Dr. Granruth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rice. Back at you with good friends. And Dr. Rice is doing the Gigi thing as she has her 3-year-old granddaughter at home. So this is her day to also work from home and be with her wonderful granddaughter. So welcome everybody. I do appreciate this. This is the first policy webinar for our spring semester. We, as Dr. Rice noted, we do about 3 per semester, and we try to bounce off of what's happening in the environment. And that's a lot right now. I would like to begin by welcoming our 3 panelists. And so I will go around and introduce, well, I'll call on them, ask them to introduce themselves, and that they can give a 1 to 2 minute opening statement about immigration, and that's kind of writ large, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us, what questions you have, what topics or issues they think that you might want to know about. So trip over my words. Representative Honstein, if you want to start, and we'll go with you first, please.
All right, thank you, Laura. My name's Joe Hohenstein.
Hohenstein.
Yeah, I'm the state representative for House District 177 in Pennsylvania, which is the neighborhoods where I grew up in what folks would call the River Wards, or the lower northeast part of Philadelphia. Before I joined the legislature just about 6 years ago, I was an immigration attorney. So in the legislature, that previous career has informed the work that I do here as well. So I'm also the chair of what's called the Welcoming PA Caucus, which is a group of legislators, and we also include advocacy groups as well, who are pursuing immigrant supporting legislation, as well as standing up and defending the community when that needs to happen, and to focus on what types of state policies can support our immigrant communities as well. So I'm happy to be here and talk about those different things as we get into the presentation.
Thank you so much. And we did this 2 years ago, and boy, we're in a different place. So there might be some things that we can reflect on. Let me go to Tamara Acuna. Tamara, would you like to introduce yourselves to the panel, to the attendees, please?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. I'm excited to be here today. I'm Tamara. I'm an assistant director with student services at the Chester County Intermediate Unit. In that role, I oversee our migrant education program, as well as Head Start, Early Head Start, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, and some other community-based instruction programs. I'm excited to share with you my perspective on how schools can engage with our immigrant families and what types of changes we can make in our school practice to make sure that families are still feeling supported and engaged right now.
Thank you, Tamara. And my colleague, Dr. Kazi Hussein, who sometimes tries to take my parking spot. Dr. Hussein.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone. As I've been introduced, I'm Dr. Kazi Hussein. I've been in Millersville. I'm in the Department of Early, Middle, and Elementary Education Department. I came here in 2001. Immigration is a very near and dear topic to me because since I came to Millersville, I have been teaching about immigration, immigrants, immigration process, and effective ways to teach this topic in the classroom. Given the prevailing negative perception in my mind that it is now more important to talk about this topic, especially immigrants who are coming now, and especially also who came recently in the last 20 years, because a large portion of our population, unfortunately, lack knowledge about the contribution this particular group of immigrants are making into the development of our country, especially in the economic sector. So that's what my advocacy is, how to teach this. Because what I see in my almost 25 years here, that teachers do not give this topic a priority. And again, I understand it's not their fault because they're already pressure from the states to prepare students for the state standards. But interesting about it that because of this topic's significance, PA academic standard has already put this topic between K through 12 curriculum as one of their topic in the standards. But unfortunately, teachers do not give enough time in their social studies content. Even if they do that, what happens is they usually teach that from historical perspective rather than looking through the contemporary lens.
That's a great point. Thank you. So that's just fascinating and giving me lots to think about. We do have about 50 attendees here. And again, for our attendees, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and we will monitor that and see what we can pick up on. So Representative Hohenstein, immigration, usually not a state issue. And we know that that lots is going on at the federal level. Could you speak a little bit about why, as a representative, a state has a welcoming caucus for immigrants, and this could go on forever. This could take up the whole time of with some of the changes going on, how the state may be responding, and a couple of thoughts on that, and then we can pivot and always come back to it.
Yeah, I think as you said, the law of immigration is first and foremost a national federal law. So that's clear. But what I think a state can do with its policy and legislation informing that policy is to make itself a place where immigrants feel welcome can provide for language inclusive atmospheres. You can look at what types of businesses are being created by newcomers and focus on providing support, licensure, the opening up of different types of options in careers. One example, just recently, and even in the current climate, with the avian flu coming through, there is a real concern about the safety of our poultry and in particular, chickens and making sure that our food is safe. So poultry handlers, many of them are folks who come from other countries, and some of them have some legal status, some have a temporary status, some are citizens, but there's an entire segment of that workforce that up until last week was effectively kept out of being able to get certified as appropriate, what we call poultry technicians. In other words, people who can make sure that the poultry is clean and safe and free from disease. And we passed a bipartisan bill. Democrats supported it, Republicans supported it, the agricultural community supported it, the worker community supported it. So it passed through both the House and the Senate like that, because people were able to see, again, that immediate impact that could come with making that particular segment of the economy or that particular segment of the workforce open up to people who aren't just U.S. citizens, or aren't just permanent residents, and being able to, again, give folks that inroad, and then everybody benefits. The folks who need the work will benefit. They are provided with that additional certification. We as a society benefit because, frankly, we have safer and cleaner food, and also an entire industry, in the poultry industry, has a greater level of protection. So that's an example, and I'd be happy to talk about some of the other potential initiatives, but that's one of the things that happened. And that happened, again, even in the current context of the social and political environment in which we find ourselves, which has been one that I think devalues the contributions, both historically and currently.
Yeah, I really appreciate that example because, and we are getting some comments, so people can keep posting those, or you can see the Q&A. Because I think it's important. We have a lot of students or former students or community members that to realize that bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, people, independents, still can say what is for the greater good. So protecting the food supply or different other things that we really need to keep in mind that good things still get done and people have dialogue, and there's not just always a knee-jerk reaction to reject what the other side does. So it's a very important thing to remember with advocacy. Tamara, I'm going to go to you next, and then Kazi, I'm going to follow up based upon what Tamara says, because Tamara is in the schools now and mentioned something as we were settling in about maybe how some of the changes at the federal level are impacting her work. And while the representative and some other legislators are trying to make for a welcoming environment, how some of that is impacting what you're doing in the school system.
Sure. So we are seeing changes in attendance rates in schools, both for student attendance and for parent participation in various events. Obviously, we're still very early in the change of administration, so we're going to keep tracking what happens there. But we're trying to be really proactive in terms of ensuring that what we provide for students and families is accessible to all of our families, regardless of what their comfort level is with approaching public buildings at this point. So some things that we're doing, we're offering more home visits to families. We're helping families get their students enrolled in virtual instruction environments. We're telecasting, sort of similar to this, all of what would normally be a parent engagement activity that we would do in person at our centers. we're now doing virtually in addition to in person. So we're really trying to meet each human and each family where they are to make sure that the opportunities for students and their families to participate in our instruction and our supplemental services is not interrupted.
And I think that's awesome. And that's why I wanted to, have you share that with everyone who's here, that instead of requiring parents to come to schools, that you can go meet them where they are. And as I was listening to you, it also made me think that maybe you and the representative should talk to make sure that you have options, that somebody doesn't come in and drop in a piece of legislation that says you must do these meetings at school.
I
That
was
you,
actually thinking the same thing. I do intend to reach out after this.
um, so I think that would be great. And then, Dr. Hussein, so Tamara's in the school right now. You're preparing the future educators, and you are in the K through 12 preparation as opposed to social work, which would be my department, everything else. Can you say about, some of expand upon what you were saying about why K through 12 public school teachers, what they should know about um, kind of the historical patterns, migrant education. I mean, I'm kind of throwing everything in there, but just a couple of thoughts on if you had to say three things that K through 12 teachers should know about the migrant or immigrant children in their classrooms.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to piggyback what Tamara just said, that not only what she's doing from the administrative point of view or outside the meeting with the families, and I think you mentioned that you already see some absence in the classroom. So this is where the teacher should step in, and I'm sure the other children are also wondering why certainly some of their classmates are not there. What is the reason? And this is where the teacher has to come and educate these children and give them the fact, not, they have, I know it's a very fine line for the teachers to speak about this, quote unquote, at this moment, a very critical issue and politically charged issue. But this is where they have to educate these children that why certainly their classmates are not showing up. What is their purpose and the reason for not showing up, and what is affecting their family as well for that one. So I think it is important for the teachers to play a big role at this very moment as well, not just the advocacy group outside the building. On the other hand, following up your question, I think one of the things that many teachers are not familiar, what is the immigration process? And why these people are coming, and what are some of the process they have to go through that majority of my student teachers, as well as teachers that I have talked to and I've visited, they have no knowledge how long it takes to achieve a green card or a citizenship, or even the work permit, or H-1 visa. All of these, what is the requirements? What are the process? And then when they talk about the earlier days of Ellis Island and historical perspective, if you think about those period of time, people came by ship, landed in Ellis Island, and got off from the ship. And by the time they go to the other end of the building, they are already a citizen. So in a day, there's all these processes went through. But nowadays, it takes long time. And I share my things with my students that I came in this country in 1989. I got my citizenship in 2010. And I had to go through a lot of process, and not just process, a lot of money involved that all these immigrants have to pay, lawyer fee, government fee, and all these process. It takes long period of time. I think that is most of the teachers don't have that knowledge. Most of my students, after this topic, after class, they say, I have no idea that these people have to go through this thing. So I think the teacher needs some kind of education in this particular topic, and this process changes
Right.
frequently. I think representative would know this much better than I do, how frequently this process change. So I think that's what the teachers need to be educated, not just the general population.
Thank you so much for that. And actually, I'm going to pivot back to Tamara and then come to the representative with some of our questions. And maybe Dr. Singh, you also do current teachers, do you feel like current teachers know this? Or are there like, not Act 34, Public School Act of 49, the continuing education credits. Is this something that's actually offered to current teachers so that they can be aware? I mean, how often do we see comments of just come in the legal way?
Yeah.
We haven't done anything since 1986 to make anything easy.
Exactly. I don't think this particular topic is part of their continuing development. I don't know school itself focus on that particular topic and require the teachers to be trained on this particular topic. So that's something needs to be done, and I think representative can speak on this in their maybe education committee. Required that student teacher has to improve their knowledge in this particular topic as well. I haven't seen anybody, even at the graduate level classes, that I see the practicing teachers who are coming into the classes. When I speak about this one, they said, we have no idea. I don't know where to go find information on this. And once in a while, I do get invitation from some of the social studies teachers. Hey, could you come and talk to my students about your process and what is the, even they don't know how many different types of immigration happen to this country.
Right, right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So
So Tamara, would you say you see that in practice too, that teachers, maybe like a lot of Americans, don't quite understand our history and processes of immigration?
I think that the majority of teachers have no idea what their families and students are experiencing when it comes to immigration. I think maybe more the exception is teachers who are really aware of and I don't want to say concerned, because I think all teachers are concerned about their children's
yeah,
holistic development,
absolutely.
but I think harder for teachers to recognize this piece as impacting what's happening in school instead of just externally what's happening to families. Um, Even in terms of what happens to us with migrant education, we tend to see a lot more interaction and connection with school guidance counselors and school social workers, as opposed to teachers um, being able to embed themselves in this type of work. So I think it is a really good point about a level of education that needs to happen so that these conversations aren't so scary for teachers as they're occurring and can really just be a more natural part of what happens in a classroom.
Okay. Representative, I do have a question for you, but do you want to comment on anything that's been going on here so that I saw you posting some files and we will get those out to our participants?
Yeah, so I did on this issue of the history. I think one thing that's really important, you mentioned, we really haven't seriously updated anything since 1986. So one of the pieces of immigration history that folks need to know is our current structure was put in place in the early 1950s. And from that time period, all the way through the mid 80s, 86, maybe 1990, but every 4 or 5, 6 years, there was a revision that simultaneously increased levels of enforcement, some of the different, rules that might constrict immigration, but also we opened things up each with each one of those revisions as well. There was a release of pressure valve, either amnesty programs, an increase in the number of visas that were provided for. We really are still operating on visa numbers, the raw numbers that are in the tens of thousands, that are based on population and immigration that was occurring in the mid-80s. That's 40 years ago. So even if we were to consider coming the right way in 1950, 1960, and 86 meant something a lot different with a much shorter wait time, a much easier to understand structure that made some common sense. Right now, we have people waiting for relatives that will never be able to get here legally on applications for 10, 15, 20 years. And that's doing things the right way. That's happening because we've refused since the mid-80s to include that expansion of immigration, that expansion of benefits in some way, or the release of the pressure valve that comes up with illegal immigration. We haven't done it, and instead, all of the major immigration reform, and not really reform, just bills that have been set, because the only thing they've looked at is increased levels of enforcement, increased levels of detention, and so we're treating immigrants more and more as criminals rather than as folks who have bought into the American dream and are coming here because of our freedom, political, religious, and also our economic opportunity, and that those are quintessentially American values. And that's what we're missing when I think we look at the education debate. One of the things we're trying to do on the state level is to inform people, and one of the bills that we have is called a welcoming an Office of New Pennsylvanians, which would again provide certain business and other social supports for people who are coming here as refugees, people who are here in any way that either they do have full legal status of some sort, but they might need some changes, or folks who need legal support as well. So one of the other things I just want to, and I'll
Sure.
jump back off.
No.
There's been some questions on budgeting. We know that recent changes in the executive orders and the funding coming from the federal government has cut off, literally just cold turkey, refugee resettlement services and many of the other services that we are providing to legal immigrants and legal newcomers, in particular refugees, and one real important group that I like to call out because are Afghan refugees who for 20 years contributed to supporting a U.S. foreign policy that was trying to establish a democratic government. That ultimately failed. But those Afghan refugees are people who have been doing the work of our government for over 20 years, and they're in danger if they stay in their home country because of it. And for us to not welcome those folks who have done our country a great service is something that I think is really, really dangerous for us to do. So all of that means is that there's less money, and we are looking at ways that the state government can provide an expansion of some of that. There are two primary areas. One is a little bit easier because the price tag is lower, and that is legal services. There's a project called the Family Unification Project, or the PA or PIFUP, FUP, right? So those folks are the agencies that provide direct attorney representation for people who are, in particular, folks who are in detention settings, but really folks in all the different settings who need attorney representation. So we are trying to get some state government funding for that. The more difficult one, because it's a much larger price tag in the 100 million type of range, is replacing the refugee and the housing and the employment resettlement funds that are out there, the education funds that are out there. So that's going to be a
Yeah.
little bit harder, but it is going to be one of the funding requests that are out there.
Right. I appreciate that. And for our other son, my voice sounds funny to me. Can you still hear me? Okay. Technology that other panelists that we had invited to this panel are not available because that money was cut. Um, and people have lost their jobs in resettling immigrants. Church World Services, that we're all very familiar with, taking um, a huge cut. So of course, as I'm listening to all of you and different other things, and Kazi, I see I'll go back to you momentarily. Um, for all our attendees, keep in mind, even though immigration is the purview of the federal government overall, and then it comes down to the states and what states can do to assist new Pennsylvanians or whatnot, that remember your advocacy tools. If you've got two federal senators and Senator John Fetterman and Senator David McCormick, and then each of you will have a congressional representative, that if you want these funds turned back on, you need to be reaching out to these people and letting them know how you feel about it. Well, they're getting a lot of calls these days, so you may not be able to get through to the staff, but hopefully you'll get a voicemail or you can go onto their websites and send an electronic comment. So your advocacy matters, and so please, and sometimes I've been saying to my students, every dang day, send them a new email every dang day, so that they know, because if they don't hear your point of view, they may not be hearing that point of view. Kazi, did you want to add something to that?
Just quickly, just piggybacking on what Representative just said, I like your example of Afghan refugee. This is a very important point because initially, the initial refugee that was brought here, they still have many family members still back there. And our government has made the process so lengthy for these people uh, to come. So that's an interesting thing that we need to change some of these policies because they are still living in hiding, many of them. I was listening to an interesting NPR report a couple of months ago that they were tracking a particular family. They're still hiding because the process hasn't gone through. They don't know when they will be able to come to the United States, and they're sometimes take risk to cross the border, and that's not an easy way to, those treacherous mountain area of Afghanistan. So that, thank you for bringing that, Representative, that I really appreciate. And exactly that's what I also talk about in my class, that the refugee that you see, their life, only one person's life may have been saved. There are still relatives who are still waiting out there. And the process takes so long for them to come to that. And that's one of the main reason why people are coming undocumented ways entering, because if they wait in their country and wait for long process to complete, they may not even be alive. So that is what their situation is at stake. So thank you for bringing that. I really appreciate for you to give that example. That's a fantastic example.
It is. It's they made a choice to help us, and now we need to protect their human rights. Everyone is supposed to have an ability to leave a country and go ask for asylum or refugee status in another country, and we've shut that down right now. So to call it out as a human rights violation. So I saw that a few people were asking for resources, and I think even though we might not have, the exact answers, the representative spoke a little bit about Pennsylvania trying to get more resources. We talked a little bit about Church World Services, which was in there. But Tamara, there might have been one in here of that maybe you can comment on about how do you maintain trust with about maintaining trust with the parents, and somebody saying we're not outing them, are they? So can you talk about how the school systems are addressing this if immigration shows up at your door?
Sure. And I can't speak for all of the school systems, but I can certainly tell you what we're doing locally. And then first, though, I do want to just say schools don't even have the right to ask children or families what their legal status is. There should never be a time that anybody is outing a student due to their status or their family due to their status. I think when we were talking about the fear of immigration, we were more globally talking around it's really not even just our undocumented population that are afraid right now. It's people who are afraid of just even being singled out or treated differently or picked up incorrectly. So I think there's more on the table than just documentation or undocumented status. And no teacher should ever be putting a student in a situation where they're hearing about their peers' status at school. In terms of how we're handling the current situation, we are really treating the current situation like we would handle any other visitor to school. And I think that seems to be the process that most schools are taking, which is that we're not allowing visitors into our school. Our schools are safe spaces for our students. If there's an actual reason for someone to be visiting, then that is being handled by an administrator. If there was something like legal documentation, that's being reviewed by administrators and our legal teams before we would ever allow anybody to enter a school system. And we do that for the safety of all students, regardless of what the situation is. So whether that's immigration or any other type of visitor, we really treat the situation like our students come to school to be safe, our families trust us to keep them safe, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we continue to embody that regardless of what the environment is.
Thank you. And so this is my lack of knowledge, but when I read it in the paper, is it true that if someone is like if ICE shows up at your school, it's a civil issue, not a criminal issue, and does that make a difference? I see. So I'm getting some nods. If Representative, if you want to speak to that with Kazi also, of like so because some people always assume if the cops show up, I have to do what they say. And of course, we know we have certain rights to say no, never let them search your car, anyone. Never agree. But can we talk a little bit about the difference between a criminal and a civil violation when it comes to immigration? Representative?
Okay, so yes, the federal immigration law is a civil law, and the way that we've talked to people about how to interact with ICE is just what you said. You have a right to stay silent, not even answer any question. Now, if there is a directed and personal warrant for the person, then that's a different thing. But you need to pay attention to that. I think, in particular, if it is a judicial warrant. ICE, as an agency, can write its own warrants, but that again is only for the civil violation and doesn't really place any responsibility on an employer or a school to say, oh yeah, here, come on in. So that, but you do need, if you're in any type of institution, you need to see or encourage that institution to create a policy. And that was some of the resources that we've provided
Oh,
folks.
good.
Do talk a little bit about what to do if ICE comes or if it comes on a raid, that kind of thing. One interesting thing is I think Millersville in particular is right near the borderline of whether it is considered part of the border. The first 100 miles or so of land territory in the United States is considered the border. So included in some of the packets, and so there's different rules on what ICE can do within that 100-mile time period versus what it can do in the interior. So
That's fascinating.
Millersville, I believe, is right on the line. So I'm not exactly sure where you all would be. The other interesting thing that is coming up in the Trump administration is an increased use of what is called expedited removal, which is someone who cannot prove that they've physically been in the United States for more than 2 years can be removed from the United States without any of the standard processes that we would associate, like no asylum application, no, well, you can, there's some limited procedures for claiming asylum, but you don't get to see a judge, is really the
Mm,
bottom line. And so there's a streamlined process for expedited removal that the Trump administration is beginning to use or intending to use. But again, they have to be able to show that the person hasn't been here for 2 years.
okay.
So one of the key things in all of this is for anyone who is either with or around or is someone who is stopped by an immigration official, that right to remain silent is something that all people have, no matter what your status or your birthplace is. You have that right. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be completely protected, but there are protections that come with that. But the other key there is anybody working within institutions should really work to make sure that those institutions have specific policies in place so that any actions you decide to take are within some sort of a framework that has been vetted in your institution. You don't want to go rogue and just like bar the door on somebody, but that's not really something that you're allowed to do.
I, yeah,
And at the same time, you also don't want to be opening up that door if it's something that your institution has indicated that they don't want people to be doing.
right, right. I think, as Kazi, I'll come to you in a second. I think so many folks, um, um, if your experience is to have a positive experience of law enforcement, your inclination is to cooperate. Um, but people should check in on when can I say no to a search? When can I say no to this? When can I stay silent? Because those are rights that we have. And I see, and so for my social workers or social work graduates on the call, looking at you, Emily Snyder there, um, to maybe be the person who's going to write the policy for your organization, offer to do that. But Emily also said, you can ask your solicitors, your attorneys that work for the organization, what are we allowed to do? Have a training, organize that, so that everyone in the organization knows. Kazi, did you want to add something to that?
Um, Exactly what representative was saying about the laws. I think this is again the education part is important. At this very moment, I personally feel that a lot of school districts are not aware what their rights are. What are the immigration laws on the book, and where if ICE comes, what they can say or what they can do. And this is where also the education is important by the advocacy group to each of these district administration. Say, hey, this is your right. These are some of the things you can do when the ICE come. These are some of the things that you are bound to do. So that education is not there. So that's why you will see some school district may not um, be as resistant when ICE comes to their school because they don't know what's their right. They don't know all the things because their particular lawyer in the district is not expert in immigration laws. So that's again, the education is important. And also another thing what Representative says, the federal law does not allow any local jurisdiction to ask about the immigration status of any citizen, even if it's a traffic stop, they have no right. But that has changed a little bit in many cases. For example, Texas recently, I think, gave the permission for the police to ask that status at any time. About 10 years ago, Arizona did a law, tried to do, but part of that was struck down by the Supreme Court, is that what they call show me your paper. And
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly was the law they intended that police can ask the status of the immigrants at any time when they stop, whatever the reason is. What is your status in this country? Legally, they're violating the federal law because federal law says you cannot ask that. That's a federal jurisdiction, not the local or even state, even though some state are now changing those. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Representative, about this particular aspects.
Uh, go ahead.
Yeah, so there are legal cooperation agreements that can be entered into between um, local and state officials and immigration on these issues, but they have to be very, very specific and tailored, and they often actually, even if they are set up, they run into problems because the idea of who is in what type of status is extremely complex, and the risk that municipalities take if they do this, and then they are the ones that make a mistake. ICE has left those municipalities out to dry. The city of New York paid almost $100 million for wrongfully providing information and access by ICE to people in its prison system. And it's there, if you start going after folks and they actually end up being U.S. citizens, the cost is very significant, and there's a reason that this is something that we really leave in the hands of experts. One example of that is to go back to a very early question that somebody asked about people who are originally adopted and what their potential status is. The idea of an adoptee being a U.S. citizen is an extremely complicated thing. And I've had people who believe that they were U.S. citizens for almost their entire lives, and then come back from a trip abroad, and then they're being told, no, you're not. And oh, by the way, there's all of these other problems because other stuff never happened. So the idea that is an issue. I would say anyone who is an adoptee or the parent of an adoptee who is not born in the United States, if that person doesn't have both a certificate of naturalization and a U.S. passport, you should be making sure that you're consulting with an attorney to verify your child's status and then to take proper steps to have it fully documented by both the U.S. Immigration Service, which is the certificate of naturalization, and the U.S. Department of State, which is your passport. You need to make sure that both agencies understand that the child is a citizen, and you also have to make sure that you have it right. I have someone who was adopted and then was provided as part of the adoption with a New Jersey birth certificate, and thought that made them a citizen. Because there were other steps that weren't taken.
Okay. I'm going to be
but all of
texting
this
my
is-
sister later.
Yeah.
So, I know Kazi has to go to class. So, and Tamara, I want to come back to you to follow up with something. But Kazi, do you want to kind of give a final thought and then go keep doing your wonderful job of educating all these teachers?
Thank you. Thank you. I will continue that education is all the advocacy, all the policy can only work if we cannot educate the mass population. And the only way those policies will work if people understand why that policy was put in place and what these immigrants go through in order to be here. So the education part is important in order to win the hearts and minds of the people who have a negative perception. It's not that they are intentionally do that, many of them, they just don't have enough information to make their decision or make their opinion about any particular group for that matter. And that's what is important to me
Yeah.
in all places, that education is important, and that has to start early on, so that these kids grow up a well-known citizen, so that those things does not occur over and over again or frequently when situation gets
Yeah.
bad a little bit.
So maybe a possible teaching institute in the summer or something like that. Give you more work to do. So
Yes.
Kazi, you sign off when you're ready. Thank you so
Okay.
much for your
Thank
attendance
you.
here. It
Thank you
was really,
again, Representative. I appreciate. I may send you an email in the sense that if anything I can do in your work, I would be happy to assist you in any shape or form at the state level or any form. So I will be in touch if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I think especially your perspective on being able to talk about the current contributions, we will be in touch, especially as we talk about some of these other pieces of legislation.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Tamara, thank you again for your contribution from that angle. Keep up the good work as you're doing. Thank you, everyone.
Really nice to meet you.
Good day, rest of the afternoon. I have to run to the
yeah,
class.
yeah. He's got to teach. He's got to work.
Thank you.
But
Thank
this
you
is
all.
again, for the attendees, this is how organizing works, right? You meet somebody and you make the connections and you keep doing the work. So Tamara, as Kazi logs off, with some of the folks asking, do you feel like folks in your school would know the answers if what would they need to know? Because there's been a cool thing. So people are asking, I'm sorry, where can they find quality professional development for school personnel surrounding immigration? Um, I don't know if there was something else that was on my mind when they were talking about what else, that what you can say no to. Would you feel that school staff might know that they can and not answer questions, or or the school districts talking, or it's different school systems talking about more professional development opportunities in this area?
I think that school staff are well informed about their right to say no. That's my perception, at least. I'm confident that our staff are well informed. I did just put a link in our box about some quality professional development that's available, and I can send you some additional resources after after
Great.
this is over. But there are some organizations that are doing some really nice work around making sure that people have the information and understand what their rights are.
Okay. And that we will get all these resources, we will gather them and we will get them out to all of the attendees. And just maybe one final question here, and then we'll go to the kind of the closing remarks. Representative, is there anything that can be done for temporary protected status if that's taken away from people? Can they be protected in PA, or is the federal law
No,
take precedence?
it's going to be a federal issue. And there are already issues both for Venezuelans and for Ukrainians with the different types of temporary status. So there's nothing special that Pennsylvania can do to protect those folks directly. What we could decide to do is to provide some access to documentation IDs on a state level that might assist some of those folks in at least maintaining a regularized sort of standard type of life. But in terms of making sure that they maintain that status, we have to make sure we're doing that advocacy at a federal level. And
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons why I provided the federal contacts, because I do think that particularly in the Senate, there is some opening to make sure that we don't do really drastic changes that are going to be draconian in nature for many of our settled populations that don't have permanent status. There are entire segments. There's DACA, there's TPS that we provided to Central Americans, there's TPS that's been provided to Venezuelans and to Ukrainians. There's different types of parole status that people are in. Those types of policies are in danger in the current federal administration. And I think one of the best ways to combat it is going to be federal advocacy and federal lobbying by telling the stories of those communities in people's districts and neighborhoods.
Thank you. So as I watch the time here, I think we'll kind of just take advantage of this opening to say that we can kind of do our wrap up. I'll sit up a little straighter. So Tamara, again, any thoughts as we conclude here of what a number of our attendees are probably social work students or education students or practitioners, of what, if you could give them a couple of pieces of advice or one or two things, what you would tell them to work on as they go about their daily work.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's amazing that they're here and participating, because that shows a real focus and support for our families. So thanks everybody for being part of this. I think from my perspective, the biggest opportunity is making sure that you're willing to think outside the box to find ways to treat all of your students equitably, and whether your students are social work clients, students in school. I think it's really important to really consider what families need, what individual students need, and how we can remove the barriers to make sure that every student has access to a fair and public education.
Thank you, Tamara. And again, to the students, think cheaply. Putting something on a postcard or laminating a 3x5 card so parents know their rights and you leave it behind with them. That's easy advocacy. So that they know what to do if there's a knock on the door. And representative. So again, thank you so much. It's been 2 years since we did this, and it was a totally different lens last time when things were looking much differently. And final thoughts from you on what folks can do to stay engaged, or anything else that you might want to share with the attendees.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is the changes specifically in immigration, but also many of the other changes that are coming through with executive orders from the president and some of the manner in which they're being communicated. Executive orders are weak law in the sense that they do not go through the standard process of compromise, and they're not checks and balances. That's part of why we have the Congress, is to really flesh out and to get a much broader consensus about what our policy should be. So executive orders have always been places that don't necessarily represent the full breadth of public opinion and public engagement. So in that regard, you recognize that that's one of the things that's going on, but that the rationale behind it is that there's a specific intent to create an atmosphere of fear and chaos. And so one of the best ways that we can respond to that is to combat our fears straight on, and to combat the chaos by providing really directed information as best as we can. And again, some of the resources that I provided that I hope you share with all the attendees can really go a long way in providing that level of information, that level of structure that helps you when you're faced with this sort of constant onslaught. And so that's what you can do strategically and logistically. I also think that there is, with respect especially to immigration, you have to recognize that the actual logistics to accomplish a policy that says we want to do mass deportations is not a possibility. So that is why the fear, the confusion is being created in order to make people do that job themselves, to get, so
Oh,
fed up,
yeah.
or to, just leave on their own, right? Or to stop pursuing a legal avenue, because of fear that it's gonna, end up in more, with more problems. So you don't need to feed into that, and you don't need to do their job for them, in that respect. The final thing I'll leave folks with is something that, um, Harry Chapin once attributed to Pete Seeger, when Pete Seeger was asked about, um, what is, being involved in what people might call the struggle, or, all these years. And Pete Seeger said, look, I don't know if anything I've ever done actually has made a difference. But that's not so much the point, because the point is that in doing so, you're engaging and connecting with other people who have alive eyes, alive heads, alive hearts, and who are committed to lifting up people, in all the different areas, especially those folks who are on the margins, or who are the most
Yeah.
vulnerable. And it's that commitment and engagement with other people who are part of it, that is what you can take as your reward at the end of the day, rather than necessarily looking at and trying to figure out where we are on the arc of progress that we all try to, consider ourselves on and to work on
Thank you.
together.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will be sharing all those resources, and we might even, as we go to other events or different celebrations, we might, Tamara put in there about the ACLU having a Know Your Rights card. We are definitely going to compile these and get them out to the attendees and use them in other places. Representative, thank you so much for your time. So much. I really appreciate it. Tamara, thank you so much for your time and your on the ground work, and your pivoting to going to see the parents and the students instead of making them come see you. To the attendees, we kept most of them for the entire time. We'll get these resources out to you, and, keep fighting the good fight. As you said, even if we don't make the change we actually want to see, with the friction to bad things. And back to you, Dr. Rice.
Thank you, Dr. Granworth. And yes, thank you. I'd like to echo what Dr. Granworth said. Thank you to our panelists. I appreciate your sharing of your knowledge, your expertise. I'm a big believer in knowledge is power. And I love how you said it's a way to eliminate our fear. I couldn't agree more. So thank you, Representative, for that comment. As Dr. Granworth stated, kind of the next steps here, we are going to compile the resources, add some other resources that we may have gathered leading up to this webinar, and share those resources along with a copy of this video to all attendees, as well as the link to both the post survey and the upcoming webinar. The QR codes to both are displayed on the screen, so you can take a moment to use your phone, download that, take the survey now. You can register for the next webinar where the focus is going to be on education, but that information will be shared in the email that we follow up probably early next week. Give us a few days to get the information compiled and the video posted to our YouTube page. But again, just want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. Your questions were insightful, added to the ongoing dialogue around our ways in which we can advocate for our immigrant population here in the United States. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tamara. We love doing it too. Thank you, Representative. Everybody be safe, and hang in.